Good afternoon, collectors and friends. Welcome to Trading Card Therapy, episode number 98. Wow, that's a lot of episodes. We are closing in on 100, and today we have a fantastic show lined up for you. Someone that I've known for a very long time, and he does not do many of these at all, but I'll let him tell you about it all in his own words. And he's going to have certainly some fun stories to share of yesteryear. So stay tuned, folks, for my friend Dave Czuba, longtime national vintage card dealer. Before I bring on Dave, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. A lot of folks have been DMing me on social media about this. Hey, where can I read more and check out, some of the videos about the collections? So if you enjoy just reading stories and blog posts about some of the collections that we have purchased, over the last, I'd say, 20 years or so, you can do that on our website, or go directly to it at blog.justcollect.com. And then if you want to check out some of the videos about the collections that we purchased over the last few decades or so, you can do that right here, same place you find our Trading Card Therapy podcast on YouTube under our Just Collect YouTube channel. And of course, if you just want to listen to Trading Card Therapy, you can do that on Apple and Spotify and all that good stuff. All right, so the item I wanted to show off today is super cool. It is, let me make sure I know how to do this here. Great. It is a cello pack. So it's an unopened pack of cards, but it differs from a wax pack. Wax packs of this era usually had about 5 cards in it. This is a cello pack. It is from 1966. Now, Batman had several different editions from Topps. This one in particular is called the Black Bat. There we go. And generally what I found with packs is that the grading doesn't really matter too much. Let me know in the comments if you agree. But this pack is only graded a 6. However, it really just has to do with a small, tiny tear in the cellophane wrapper. And the actual cards itself look really sharp, at least from the first glance. And that artwork by Norm Saunders is just amazing. And of course, that is what one of the backs of the cards looks like. This one is number 28. And like I said, it features about 12 cards in this pack. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. May open it, go for a number 1 or a number 2 card in high grade. They go for big money. And the set itself is kind of small. I think at about 44 or 55 cards. So it's nice. It's a nice start to a high grade pack fresh set. So I'm curious, gang, if this was your Batman cello pack from 1966, what would you do with it? Let me know in the comments. All right, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my friend. How are you today, Dave?
I'm fine, Leighton. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on and that you're joining me. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored.
Yeah, and I am also. I've known you since you were a teenager. You've certainly come a long way.
Well, we all have, Dave, in this space, right? The space has matured a lot, the last few decades. And, you've seen a lot of it prior to, the eBay world and prior to the internet world. So before we kind of get into all that, for those that don't know you, Dave, if you could just give a very quick background and intro about who you are and, where you're from and kind of your upbringing in this. Did you love sports as a kid? Did you kind of fall into this accidentally? All that good stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to. I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, Leighton, in 1955, and always had a love of sports. And Yankee Stadium was only 12 miles away. So my dad would take me to 5 to 10 games a year, starting around 1965. And Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris were my boyhood baseball heroes. And I had a paper route in 65, and I loved buying those 5-cent wax packs. And I would buy several boxes a year. And would trade them and collect them. And that went on up until about 1969. And when I graduated college in 73, I ended up going to Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. And one day while I was there, my mom cleaned out my room for my brother and threw out my baseball cards. So I had to start from scratch. But what experience happened, I would set up at a flea market outside of Gettysburg on weekends to make money for my college expenses. and I was buying and selling coins at the time. And I walked in one Sunday morning in 1975, and there was an old timer there with stacks of T206 tobacco cards on his showcase. And I watched this transaction go down, and there was 20 piles of 100 in a pile for 2,000 T206s. And he was counting them out, and another fellow was there, and he paid $2,000 for $1,000 for 2,000 T206s in 1975. And
Bucket
there I
card.
was. My dad was paying $4,500 a year for my college education, and I said to myself, "There's got to be something into this." That was a spark that triggered me. After I graduated in '77, I stayed in Gettysburg and started going to flea markets. And if I had an extra $20 in my pocket, I was buying old baseball cards. And then I would go to yard sales, and the average shoebox at a yard sale in 1977 was about $20. So I'd be pulling out Mickey Mantles and
Oh,
all the great ones. And I just started hoarding these, the baseball cards. And that went on for about 4 years. In the meantime, I had moved to Altoona, Pennsylvania with a new job. I was a cigarette sales rep. And that opened up other doors with distributors. I was able to buy wax cases, and that snowballed. And I went to my first card show in 1981, and I was completely overwhelmed.
where
And
was it, Dave? Do you
that
remember?
was in Monroeville, PA, which is outside of Pittsburgh.
How many
So
dealers do you think were set up there,
it
approximately?
was a large show. There was probably 100 dealers, but the prices and the activity, it was really special. It was really a high octane atmosphere, and that really triggered me into thinking, you know what, I can make money doing this also. So then I set up at my first card show in early 1982 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Oh
And
wow, Carlisle, Pennsylvania is pretty famous, right?
yeah, Jim Thorpe
Yep.
territory, and it's outside of Harrisburg, and a very large collecting population out there. And I set
Very
up.
cool.
I did $200, and I said, "Boy, this is the greatest. I'm off and running."
Wow,
And
that's awesome. That's awesome, Dave. Before you move forward, because I want to make
yes,
sure I don't forget, you said something about that prior show to 82, that first one with all that
yes,
activity, and you said, and I quote, it was special. What
yes.
made it special in your eyes?
Just the fact that so many people of all ages were buying baseball cards, and back in the '70s, if you were older than 12, 13 years old, you collected baseball cards, they looked at you kind of weirdly, this kid's an oddball, because from there you moved on to girls and cars.
Sure.
So those who still collected baseball cards, didn't want to really admit that. But
So
when I saw there was kids there from 8 years old to grandpas of 60, 70, 80 years old, it was a family atmosphere. And I
it
just
wasn't
thought it was
just the
really
material,
special.
it was really everything that struck you about the situation that you thought that you're like, and this is kudos to you, Dave. I mean, this is you're talking multiple decades ago, and
Yeah,
yet
yeah,
pre-internet, pre-eBay, you saw something, and not just the spark from that T206 deal, but you saw something at early convention. And kudos to you, like I said, for being able to be a forward thinker and identify something you had a passion for, and to take a chance on something.
I did. And then another big event in my baseball card life. Later on that year, I was set up at a show in Saddlebrook, New Jersey. There
Okay,
was a Holiday Inn there, right near where my
this is
parents lived
82
when I
now,
grew up.
right?
Yes, this is the
Okay,
fall of
so make sure I follow
'82.
it for the audience. Okay.
Yes, and I had that summer. I bought a large collection of 1951 Bowman cards in Gettysburg, and I had those at the show. And I had several mint 1951 Willie Mays Bowman rookies. And in comes this fella. He's looking in my showcase, and he says, "Can I see those 51 Bowman Mazes?" I said, "Sure." And he was looking for the most mint one, and he paid me $150 for it. And it turned out to be Alan Rosen, Mr. Mint. So,
Oh,
so
wow.
my
And this is
first
in
interaction,
1982?
yes, the fall of '82, my first interaction with Al, he actually bought a card from me. And we started talking a little bit, and we found out we were both born in the same hospital in Paterson, New Jersey, Paterson General. And
Small world.
yeah, very small world. And, we chit chatted a while. He went his way. And then I started signing up for more and more shows in North Jersey, in central Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. And before long, I started seeing Al at shows. He was setting up, and he was just turning into Mr. Mint, the big brash dealer who paid the most for your cards. And he and I developed a nice friendship, and we hung out at shows together, and that opened up other doors for me. Through the '80s, I was doing about 40 shows a year, and
Wow.
working my cigarette job through the week, doing shows on the weekend.
Wait, you were doing 40 shows a year and you were
Yes,
still maintaining your sales job?
yes, yep.
How'd you maintain your sanity?
Oh, it was exciting. It was it was just it was like a rush every time you did it. You walked into a new
Really,
location.
it was like a jolt of energy. And I want to
Yes, yeah,
remind folks that are maybe just listening to this and not watching. And by the way, if I can, and please, we're going to of course continue anyway. But if it's possible to keep the phone a little bit more still while we're doing
yes,
it, but if not, don't worry about it.
that's
So
okay. Yeah,
anyway,
I will.
that sounds good, Dave. So
Yeah.
for those that might just be listening to this and not actually watching, this is such a pivotal time in the hobby because, as Dave is alluding to, Mr. Mint isn't really quite known as that yet. And yet you guys cross paths over this collection of cards, which really you're kind of moonlighting as a dealer, right? You haven't dove in full time yet. And it's just so serendipitous that someone you were going to eventually forge such an amazing relationship with cross paths with you, such an early stage of, if we look at it the way the hobby is now, Dave, versus the hobby in 1982, it's like a different planet, right?
It is, and that was just a stroke of luck.
Sure.
The fact that he went to that show, I was there, and we hit it off. That was the main thing. Mr. Mint is those collectors who got to know him over the years. He could be loud, he could be brash, and he was intimidating. And whenever he and I then would set up at shows together and go on deals together, I was kind of like the calming influence in the
I could see that,
situation.
Dave, very
You know?
much.
Yeah, yeah. I was, and one guy actually said to me, "You're his alter ego." And he said, "When I was about ready to walk out and lose the deal, but you kind of calmed things down." So he and I really were a good team out there. And well, back to the '80s, Leighton.
Yeah.
I decided to open up a baseball card shop. I bought a small building in Duncansville, Pennsylvania. It was a little Minute Mart, and I turned it into a full-time baseball card shop in December of 1986.
Wow.
So there now, starting December 1st of '86, I had a baseball card shop, a cigarette sales rep job, and doing 40 shows a year. I was running like crazy, and that went on for a couple years. And then in early '89, I decided to give up my cigarette job and do the baseball cards full time. And to this day, I'm going to be 70 years old this year. I've slowed up a little bit, but still enjoy what I'm doing.
That's amazing that early meeting, those early conventions shaped your life as much as it did. And I always say, for the kids that come into our store or just collect here in Summit, New Jersey, and I was in Cooperstown this past weekend, and a gentleman I was buying some cards from, there was a really curious, like 10 or 12-year-old kid who came over, and the gentleman gave him a 1940 play ball card, and him, not a super valuable one, but him and I both were marked. And similar to what we're talking about here today, Dave, we don't know how that single occurrence could shape his life moving forward.
Yeah, and
And
I always cater to the kids also. There's a story goes back to the mid '80s. I was set up at a show in Columbia, Maryland, and at that time it was I might have had 5 Clemente rookies and 3 Koufax rookies. Inventory was easy to find, and a young 10-year-old came up to my table and asked me to see a Clemente rookie and he said thank you and put it back. An Aaron rookie, a 56 mantle. And I took my time with him, and he walked away, and that was okay. And about 2 hours later, he came back with his grandfather. And his grandfather said, "Is this the fellow who showed you the cards?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, which ones would you like?" And he picked up 6 cards, which totaled $2,500. And the grandfather said to me, I was the only dealer who gave his grandson the time of day when he walked around by himself. And that meant something to me too. It was a lesson on both sides. Take your time with the kids, because they're going to someday also grow up, and who knows what kind of collectors they'll become. But to this day, I always have time for the kids.
I appreciate you saying that. And as you know, I bring my son Crosby sometimes to the Philly show. And
I know,
you
yeah.
and Brian Deck up front, you guys are always kind. And a couple of you guys have made jokes through the years with Crosby. And believe it or not, he'll say to me, "Dad, is that," he doesn't remember everyone's name, but he'll say to me, "Hey, Daddy, is that person going to be there that made me laugh about such and such?" And so I'm saying we really are shaping, whether it be through the actual sport of baseball, through cards. There's a lot of things that are coming out of the hobby that are really great for kids, Dave. But to kind of get back to center here, because I'm fascinated, of course, with a number of different parts of your story. How long you've been in the hobby for? I tell people, Dave, that when I went to school and graduated in 2000, that I took a chance, meaning, people weren't really buying and selling cards for a living back then. I'm nothing compared to what you did. Certainly, people were not doing it back when you decided to take a chance. So I'm curious. You said, I think it was in 1989 or 1986, you opened the store. In 89 or 90, you eventually got out of that sales position. That was certainly 10 years before I even graduated college. Were there peers of yours or friends of yours or family members that looked at you like you had 3 heads? Like, what are you doing, Dave?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, when I gave my resignation letter, I gave 30 days notice. And the morning of my last day, when I handed in my company vehicle, and I went home, and I said to myself, what the heck did you just do? I gave up a company vehicle, I gave up health care, and I gave up a $40,000 job in 1989 to buy and sell baseball cards. And I was really, for a couple days, just in a fog, saying, did I make the right decision? You're crazy. And, because at that time, dealers at a show, there might have been 20 full-time dealers and 80 just did it for the fun. So you're right. In 1989, there was not a lot of people doing it for a living. And, but obviously it worked out better than I could ever have imagined, because, there's been several peaks and valleys in this business since the 1980s. There's been a few slow points, and then something happens. Upper Deck started in 89. Things went wild, and then it slowed up a little bit, and then other merchandising companies came in, and we were off to the races again. And then when grading started in the late 90s, that was another facet that just piqued interest, and people were going crazy trying to get 8s, 9s, and 10s on their cards, and it was wild again.
Yeah, you really have seen so many of the ups and downs. I'm curious to get back to Mr. Mint for a minute. May he rest in peace. Were you working with him on the infamous 1952 Topps deal in Massachusetts?
I was there when he brought them home.
Okay.
And it was just mind-boggling, because he did it in 2 phases. He didn't have enough money to buy them all the first time. But once the second phase was done, there was 80 52 Topps Mickey Mantles. Many were off center, but as we know the story now, the best one just sold for $12.5 million. And there was so many of them that the price guides actually decreased the value of the 52 mantle at the time. And
oh my God. So this is pre like everything. And wait a minute, that's insane to me. So let's rewind for a second. You weren't there in the actual deal or the 2 trips, but when you say you were there when he came home, you were literally there in his office, if you will, and you saw the material.
Yes, he called me and said, hey, I've got the 52s. A couple other dealers are coming over. If you want to come down and look at the cards. And I remember he was selling a run of high numbers in, mint condition, varying centering problems. $11,000 was a whole run, which included the Mantle, the Jackie Robinson rookie, Pee Wee Reese rookie, Campanella. I mean, all these. And another dealer friend of mine, Paul Lewicki, was there. He was buying some, and Joe Esposito, B&E Sports, was there. So, Al had his circle of dealers who he would get a deal that you call up, and we'd all converge and share the deal.
Oh my God. I have goosebumps. This is crazy to me. Because I've known you for a long time, but I've never asked such detailed questions about this. And I'm glad I saved it for today. So during that initial phase, when he got back to the office and he's having the likes of Joey Esposito in and yourself and Paul Lewicki, et cetera, these are all like his inner circle.
That was his circle. Yes.
Who stepped up at first to buy like several runs at 11,000, or was everyone scared because, as you just said, the price guy just lowered the value of the Mickey Mantle based on the fine? So what was the sentiment going on at that moment?
The sentiment was, oh my God, are we going to be able to sell all these cards?
Oh my God.
People were actually apprehensive that there was so many. And I think Paul Lewicki bought the most runs. And because he had several customers he was selling them to.
Okay.
I only bought one run, and I bought a couple of the off-center Mickey Mantles because they were only $800 a piece. So, it really was mind-boggling. It was overwhelming. That's the word I could think of, overwhelming. And even Al was nervous whether or not he could regroup the almost $500,000 he spent on that collection.
So I was going to ask you, so how much do we think he spent in the two trips, like for the whole collection?
It was almost $500,000.
Okay. And obviously in today's money, that's silly because we know the one example alone, the SGC 9.5 sold for $12.5 million.
Yes. I would guesstimate that collection today would be $100 to $200 million.
I had 100 plus million in my head, Dave. So I think we're on the same page. Let me ask you a question. Once again, to kind of focus back to that initial shock. And I've heard this as well from other sources. So I find it fascinating that in the beginning, there was so much quantity. I never heard this aspect about the price guide lowering the value of the Mantle. At what point did the switch flip? And whether it be you, Al, or others, meaning in that inner circle, Joe, et cetera, at what point did the switch flip? And did people go, oh my God, like I need to get another one of these Mantles or another one of these runs? When did that start to happen?
I bet you it was 5 to 10 years later. It wasn't soon thereafter.
Oh my God.
It took a while for those cards to circulate through the hobby.
Sure.
And that was one of the first times when, if a card booked for, let's say a common was $10 at that time, Paul and the others were getting double book value because they were so nice. And in reality, that was unheard of at the time. The Mickey Mantle, I remember the price guide had Mickey Mantle priced near mint for $3,000. Now, Al sold the three best ones for $10,000 at the time.
3.5 times book, 3 and a third time.
Yeah, and so people thought the buyers were crazy too. And it affected the market initially. Then it died down again. And but then 10 years later, when grading started, that's when a couple of those cards were graded 10s, which are in private collections today, which probably will never hit the market. I think the owners of those cards now hand them down to the children. But I bet you for 10, Marshall's one, and then the owner of the Pirates, I think, has one.
Okay.
The Diamondbacks, I'm sorry. Kendrick, I think he has one. I think there's one other one out there. And but I think if at 10 hit the market, what do you think it would bring? 50 million, maybe?
25 to 50 million.
25, 50 high, yeah. If it would ever hit the market again.
Well, that's part of it. It's likely to not hit the market. I really am. I'm just floored by Al kind of coming back and everyone being so overwhelmed, including Al, that he literally didn't know if he was going to be okay on the deal. And you just commented and said it took, and I agree, it took years for the cards to kind of find their way throughout the hobby. How long did it take Al to actually get that about 500,000 back for the deal?
I think it was back within 6 months.
Okay.
Because he had to borrow the money at the time.
I read about that.
At that point, he wasn't running around with $500,000.
Do you know, because I think I've heard in the industry, he borrowed it from someone in the hobby. Do you know who he borrowed it from?
No, I don't think it was somebody in the hobby. I think it was a relative. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep, it was a relative, and he gave him a nice commission on the money.
Sure.
And but that really got Al the ultimate publicity. That's when he started becoming on Good Morning America, nice stories in Sports Illustrated. He was a national figure. It was really amazing to watch. Just as so much publicity he brought to the hobby, which was now a major business. It wasn't like, you'd go to a family function or a wedding and people would ask, what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I buy and sell baseball cards. And they look at you kind of, oh boy, yeah, my kid has cards too, But after that, people realize there's money to be made in this, It really can be a lucrative business.
So Al really did pave the way for all of us, Dave.
He did. And you go to shows and old timers still think they talk very highly of him, that whether they got along with him or not. Al was the kind of guy, if he felt slighted on a deal or if he felt betrayed on a deal where someone said, Al, I got a 52 set I'm going to sell you, and then he sold it to someone else, he didn't talk to people for years. He held grudges. He certainly was a dynamic personality, but he could also be kind of, he held grudges. That's the best way I could put it.
I've heard certainly about his reputation. I got to know him a little bit while he was, still here, and I'm grateful for it. And even though he might have been a little bit rough around the edges, Dave, I know that if I don't have my coffee or if I didn't eat breakfast, I could be rough around the edges. So the point being is that I kind of saw certainly, beneath that surface. And Al was, just like you and I or many of the people in the hobby today, in that he really did love the action. He may not have loved the cards as much as I do because I'm really a collector, but he definitely loved the action. And I wanted to, because I don't want to keep you here all day, and I appreciate you spending the time here, Dave. Can you tell me about when you guys hooked up more formally and started to really, do deals together and hit the road together?
Well, what happened was Al's right-hand man through the 80s into the early 90s was Paul Lewicki. And Paul would do all the shows with him and go on all the deals. And they had a falling out around 1995. And that's when Al asked me, hey, are you busy this week? And I got a show in Philly. You want to come down and help me out? And I said, sure. And, it was a running joke for years that I carried Al's bags and I would set up his signs at the shows. So from 95 to when he died in 2017, wow. I was his right-hand man for 22 years. And it was a great experience, going on the deals and setting up at the shows and meeting all kind of sports celebrities. I could go on and on about the celebrities he knew and who I got to meet, and it was fantastic. But when he passed away in early 2017, then it's interesting you say about how he felt about buying and selling cards. When he passed away, he didn't own a card. He did not have a card collection. He had some memorabilia he liked, but as far as didn't have one baseball card, which in hindsight, if he would have saved one of those 52 Mantles or one of those Babe Ruth rookies or one of those Joe Jackson rookies, it would have been a fantastic a legacy to hand down. But he didn't. He just bought them and sold them. To him, it was a commodity.
Yeah, well, listen, he did love the action. So let's spend a minute, if we can, then on your tenure with him, because obviously it sounds like it was pretty lengthy. If you can touch upon maybe just a story, because obviously I don't know if any find can really compare to the 1952 Topps find that was made in '86 out of Massachusetts. I mean, it's probably the best hobby find, and it probably will continue to be the best hobby find for the next 100 years. That being
I agree.
said, you had some amazing experiences and amazing finds with him. Can you share with us one or two that come to mind where the cards were great, but the story might have been also great or better than the actual cards themselves?
Oh, there's a couple that come to mind right
I
off the
figured.
top.
I figured.
We went on a deal in Ohio. This was around 2010, and it was in between Cleveland and Toledo, and a man invited us in. He had a nice collection of 50s and early 60s cards, and he had everything on the table, and we went through every card, and we offered 25,000 for the collection. The guy agreed, and afterwards we hadn't paid yet. We were just talking, and the fella's wife came home from shopping, and she walked in and said, "Oh, hi, honey," and the husband said, "Today's my wife's birthday. She was out shopping," and she introduced herself, and she said hi, and she says, "Al, how old do you think I am today?" Well, Al looked at her and says, "Well, you don't look a day over 70." And the woman started crying. She said, "I'm 60 years old. I can't believe you said that." And
Oh my
the
God.
husband stood up and said, "You insulted my wife. Get out of my house." He threw us out, and we never made the deal. Then we had to
Oh my
drive all the
God.
way home. Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, that was awful. But that was Al, being honest. She did look 70 actually, Leighton, but you
Yeah,
don't
but
say
that's
that,
why
you
you
know.
were there. But that's why you were
Yeah,
there is like
but
this straight man, and you weren't able to make it that happen
yeah,
that day.
there was no salvaging that deal, Leighton. That was over. And then another one, we were doing the Richmond show. This is back around 1990. And a young fella called us, and we were in the cornfields outside of Richmond on a 100-degree July day. And he invited us in his house, which was basically falling down. And we had to go upstairs. He had all the cards in a dresser drawer, two dresser drawers, all lined up nice, mint, 1958 to 1963s. And that deal we offered 35,000. And the fellow looked at Al. He said, "That's just not enough." And we looked at each other and said, "Is this guy kidding me?" And he wouldn't sell the cards. So Al came up to 40,000. And the fellow finally agreed. And then I said to Al, I said, let's just take the two drawers out and leave the broken down uh, chest of drawers. So I go to take out the drawers, and the guy says, "Where are you going with that?" I says, "Well, we're taking out the cards." He says, "You can't have my dresser drawers." And Al threw in another $1,000 to buy the drawers. And the guy took it, and off we went. And another amazing story where people just love their cards so much too, and they were not ready to sell. And there's all kind of stories like that over the 22 years we did the deals, you know. And you know, we ran around with that $100,000 in his briefcase, and left it behind a couple times in a restaurant. And we were in a famous Dave's in Detroit one time, and we had just bought a collection, and we went to eat and brought the briefcase in, ate, left. The briefcase was under the table, and we realized it a half hour later, and we turned around. I drove 90 miles an hour back to the restaurant, and the maitre d' was at the front door saying, "Sir, you left this behind," and all the money was there.
Oh my God. There's good
So
people out
yeah,
there, Dave.
yeah, there is good people, but yeah, a lot of deals, a lot of experiences, most good, some crazy, but it was a
Sure.
wild 22 years, and Al was really something.
Yeah, he was, and I miss him. And I didn't work with him as closely as you did. I'm curious, just because I'm a pre-war, nerd. Is there one pre-war collection that comes to mind that you bought with Al that, like, today you would be like, Leighton, you would just lose your proverbial you know what over because it was that amazing back then?
Yeah, we were in California for a collection one time, and the fella had notebooks full of strip cards of T205s, T206s, T210s, which the Joe Jackson rookie was part of. We bought that. So we bought $250,000. We spent $250,000 in California and came
Wow.
back with just tens of thousands of pre-war cards,
Oh
Gowdy
my
sets,
God.
and
Oh my
yeah,
God.
and believe it or not, the guy had them stored in Southern California in a storage shed. We're going through all these cards in a storage shed, and
Oh my
that
God.
was an amazing collection. Also, that was also one of the biggest ones we ever bought. And
So, out of curiosity, what did you guys do on the road if you found a deal like that? Excuse me. And it went beyond the means of what Al had available.
well, that deal there, we actually flew out with $500,000.
Oh, wow.
So
You
we
didn't
did
mention
have the
that.
money. Yeah, yeah. Actually, myself, Joe Esposito,
Yeah, I know
Al,
Joey.
and Joe's sidekick Drew. We all flew out.
Oh,
So
wow.
we
You had
did.
the whole
So
posse.
we did, and so once the deal was done, we hired a truck to bring it back to Jersey, and then we all went to Chevis Ravine and saw a Dodger game. We still had $250,000 in our pockets, and we're sitting there in left field, uh, watching a baseball game. So, Al was able to relax at the end of the evening at a show or a deal. If we stayed overnight,
Hmm.
we would watch a ball game, or
Have a
he
dinner.
always liked fancy restaurants. So he was never a cheapskate when it came to buying meals or staying at the best hotels. Also, that was my main perk: nice hotels and good dinners.
Yeah, I know.
Because he
Sounds like
never,
you did okay for yourself. I love that
yeah,
you're
yeah,
telling everything with a smile on your face. I
it
think that
is,
says a
yeah.
lot about your experience, Dave. Um, you know, I've never thought about this before in this terminology, but I really do think about now you and Al and Joey, who I'm still friends with, and know
Yep.
his sons, as the original baseball card cowboys. I mean, you guys were out there conquering the wild west of our country when there was no eBay, right? When there was
Yep.
no internet, there was a very small, as you just described it, almost like in the
It-
mafia, like a
it-
consigliere, to each other.
yeah. There was no map quest. There was no, type it into, where you're going, put it in the system. We wrote down directions on a piece of paper. We didn't know where we were going half the time. And if
Wait,
you
tell
wrote
me
down
what
a
would
wrong,
happen when Al would get lost. Did he remain? Did he have composure, or he would just lose his proverbial? You know what?
no, he blamed me for everything. If we got lost, it was my fault. Either I
Definitely, I
wrote
already
down,
knew that. Yep.
yeah, I wrote down the wrong direction, or I made the wrong turn, and that did happen a couple times where we never found the
I'm
deal.
shocked. In 22 years, I'm shocked. Wait, were you never actually got to the deal?
No, we had to go back home and recall the guy because we couldn't find the place.
Dave,
And
oh
one,
my God, that's
yeah,
amazing.
and one time the guy said, "Well, yeah, I gave you the wrong directions. It's my fault." And another time, I just missed the call and ended up 50 miles away. I was going east instead of west. So,
So, like
yeah,
MapQuest literally saved your life.
yeah, that helped. Yes, it did. Yep. Yeah, it was wild. It was wild. Handwritten directions. And
Um,
and and no, like you said, no cell phones. If we got lost, how can we call them? We're in the middle of nowhere. So
oh my
it
God.
it,
Dave,
it
I
was
really could
wild.
keep you on forever today, but I'm gonna try to limit it to one more question. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
And spare you. The national is upcoming. Okay. It's a couple months away. And you've been doing the national for a very long time.
Yes.
And you've been doing the national so long, the national existed before internet, before eBay. So just do us a favor and give us a little glimpse into one of those early days of the national when there was no internet, when there was no eBay. In other words, was Josh Evans waiting at 6 a.m. at the door? Like, you have to go through me to get to stuff. Like, what was it like out there on the floor?
Well, the early nationals, Al had already established himself. So
Okay.
he had a prime location. When people walked in, we had our banners up, and Al was ready to pounce on buying a collection. Now, a fellow like Josh Evans from Leland's, he was near the front and very aggressive also. And Bill Mastro, those were kind of the big three at the time. And Josh and Al almost came to blows a half dozen times. I mean, actually, Al picked up a Mickey Mantle baseball bat and threatened to hit Josh over the head with it. They were nose to nose, and very aggressive, trying to buy the best stuff they could, and it was very aggressive. Tony Buzino was another one. He was into early memorabilia,
I remember
and
Tony.
he and Al would go head to head on deals, and there was no love lost between those guys because they were all big in their own way, and they all had resources to buy collections. And people would flood into the National. It's even more busy now than it was back in the 80s and 90s. Now it's a new thing with Pokemon and these other things. I mean, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people at the National in Chicago this summer, I believe, and
It's gonna be wild.
it's going to be insane. It's going to be insane. So, yeah, you better see people early in the show because you'll never see them the rest of the weekend. It's going to be so
You're
busy.
100% right about that. If you could give, a collector who's also kind of like moonlighting as a dealer, a bit of advice, who's going to the National, maybe setting up for the first time, what is something that you can offer as far as words of wisdom, seeing as how long you've done it, to someone who might be like an up and coming new aspiring dealer like you did? They grew into it part-time, because the National can be overwhelming these days.
Well, that's right. And the best advice I could give is be prepared. Have everything ready for sale, pre-priced. Know how much you could discount. Just be ready, because you're going to be converged upon like never before. You're liable to have, people 3-4 deep at your table, and you got to pay attention, because unfortunately, where there's money to be made, there's a couple thieves walking around. So, just be prepared. It'll be a wild experience. That's the best advice I can give.
Dave, I appreciate you sharing that. I want to give you a plug and let people know how to find you. So in other words, if they have some cards out in Pennsylvania and they want to meet with someone who's truly a vintage card expert like yourself, how do they get a hold of you, Dave?
They could do it the old-fashioned way, Leighton. They could call my cell phone, which is 814-931-8600, or they could send me an email, zubes1156@msn.com.
I love it. So we're old school here.
Yes, I am. As a matter of fact, this is the first podcast I've ever been a part of, and I want to thank you for inviting me. It's been a great experience.
Oh, listen, it's my honor. I'd love to take you to dinner, and a couple of the other guys that have been kind enough to join me in the last few months on a road to 100 here at Trading Card Therapy. Dave, like I said, I said it a couple minutes ago. The favorite part for me, aside from getting you to agree to come on, was that even through some of the crazy stories you shared over your last decades in the hobby, you did it with just such a wide smile. And so I'm grateful that you've enjoyed your time, in the hobby, and, that you enjoy it even to this day after being in it, for decades and seeing some wild stuff, most certainly along the way.
Yep. I still wake up with a smile every day, not knowing what the next collection is going to bring. So,
well, hopefully this podcast will get you another one out there in Pennsylvania. Dave, I'm looking forward to seeing you real soon in just less than a couple months at the National.
Sounds good, Leighton. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay. Take care.
All right, gang. So that was my good friend Dave Czuba, was also the right-hand man for Mr. Mint, as you heard, for about 22 years, has been in the hobby for decades. And so if you're going to be at the National Sports Collectors Convention, do yourself a favor, walk up to his booth, just say hi. I had a blast with him. I can't believe it's been almost about 45 minutes. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Trading Card Therapy as much as I did. If you do, please like this episode, subscribe to the channel so you know each and every time we have other great hobby content coming out like this. Until next time, I hope to see each and every one of you at the National Sports Collectors Convention in just a couple months in Chicago.